Okay, let's dive right into this. When we hear the name Julius Caesar, we usually just picture the military conqueror, right? The dictator, the guy crossing the Rubicon in this huge dramatic bid for power. But today, we're going to flip that script. By looking directly at his very own writings, in this explainer, we're going to shift our view of Caesar. We're going from seeing him as just a commander of legions to realizing he was actually an incredibly observant ethnographer, a totally fearless explorer of the absolute unknown, and honestly, a highly pragmatic statesman.
So, here's our roadmap for how we're going to do this. First, we'll look at the painted Britons. Then, we'll compare the Gauls versus the Germans. After that, we're heading deep into the Hercynian Forest. And finally, we'll wrap up with Caesar the Statesman. All right, part 1, the painted Britons.
Imagine, for a second, being a Roman legionary. You're stepping off a wooden transport ship onto a beach at what feels like the absolute edge of the earth. Caesar was stepping into a world that was completely alien to the Mediterranean mind, and he looked at these people with the keen eye of an explorer. He knows that these inland Britons, they didn't even bother sowing corn. Instead, they relied completely on raw nature. They survived on milk and flesh and wore rough animal skins. But the detail that really stuck with the Romans and gave them this incredibly fierce look was their use of a plant called woad. They literally dyed their bodies blue, which made them look absolutely terrifying in battle. You can just imagine how wild this culture seemed to the advancing, super-regimented Romans.
No, what's really fascinating here is a specific, kind of wild anthropological detail Caesar records about their families. Get this. He documents a unique custom where 10 to 12 men would actually share wives in common. And he notes this happened particularly among close groups like brothers or even parents and children. He delivers this detail with this totally deadpan, journalistic tone, just stating the facts on the ground. Any children born into the setup were considered the kids of the man who first married the woman when she was a virgin. It's just a striking example of Caesar playing the objective observer of a radically different society.
Moving on to part 2, Gauls versus Germans. As Caesar moved his campaigns through Europe, he wasn't just taking notes, he basically became a comparative sociologist. Let's look at the Gauls first. Their highly structured society is dominated by two main classes. You've got the fighting knights and then this powerful religious order of Druids. These robed Druids act as judges for pretty much all public and private disputes, and they teach reincarnation, the idea that souls pass from one body to another. Caesar actually points out that this totally removes their fear of death in battle, which makes a lot of sense. But then you look right across the River Rhine, and the Germans are completely different. No Druids at all. Instead of some complex, hidden pantheon of gods, they only worship the elemental forces they can visibly see and actually get a benefit from, specifically the sun, fire, and the moon. And Caesar dug even deeper into how the Germans organized their everyday lives. Listen to this rule. They didn't permit any private land ownership. None. Zero. In fact, their magistrates physically forced tribes to relocate to brand new land every single year. Why would they do that? Well, Caesar lays out their logic perfectly. It was to prevent people from getting too comfortable with farming and losing their edge for war. But even more than that, it was deliberately designed to kill the desire for wealth. By forcing everyone to pack up and move constantly, they stopped powerful guys from driving the weak off their land. It kept the common people in a state of absolute equality. They literally engineered their whole society to preserve this hardened warrior culture. Okay, let's see how this builds in part 3, the Hercynian Forest. Now, to the Romans, this forest wasn't just a big patch of trees. It was the absolute frontier of the natural world. It was a mythic, untamed wilderness where the laws of nature just seemed to warp entirely. Caesar notes it would take a quick traveler 9 whole days just to cross the width of it. 9 days! And nobody he spoke to even knew where the forest actually ended. Plus, lurking inside this massive dark expanse was some truly strange wildlife that absolutely fascinated the Roman mind. For instance, he describes these fierce, massive wild bulls called uri that were almost the size of elephants. The young Germanic guys would actually harden themselves by hunting these absolute monsters in pits, and then they'd bind their massive horns in silver to use as drinking cups at their huge feasts. But you guys, the wildlife gets even stranger. Caesar literally writes, and I'm quoting here, "There are also elks, destitute of horns, and have legs without joints. Trees serve as beds to them. They lean themselves against them and take their rest." Yes, you heard that right. He genuinely reported as fact that these animals couldn't lie down, and if they fell over by accident, they couldn't get back up. He claims hunters would secretly undermine the roots of trees, so when the elks leaned on them to sleep, the tree would snap, and boom, the animals were trapped. It's just this incredible, hilarious glimpse into the mythological zoology that the Romans just accepted as absolute scientific fact. Finally, let's hit part 4, Caesar the Statesman.
Let's snap back to civilization for a minute. We've just seen how his highly analytical mind categorized these foreign cultures and weird beasts out on the frontiers. But back home, Rome was facing a massive economic crisis. During the total chaos of the civil wars, credit was basically failing across all of Italy. Debtors couldn't pay, creditors were totally panicking, and there was this huge, terrifying rumor going around the wealthy class that all debts were going to be completely abolished. That would have literally ruined the economy. Caesar stepped into this mess knowing he needed an immediate, highly practical solution to restore trust.
So here is the incredibly elegant administrative solution he came up with. Step 1, he appointed neutral arbitrators. Step 2, he told them to value the properties and possessions of the debtors based on what they were worth before the war, deliberately ignoring the current, totally crashed wartime values. And step 3, he had those pre-war valued properties handed directly over to the creditors as payment. This is a super efficient process. It takes what could have been a totally catastrophic, complex economic collapse and makes it instantly manageable. So the crucial point here is this. By satisfying lenders with assets that retain their historical value, Caesar completely avoided the disaster of a full abolition of debt. He somehow managed to support the credit of the debtors, appease the angry creditors, and restore everyone's faith in the Roman financial system. It was an absolutely brilliant pragmatic balancing act by a guy who clearly understood human systems just as well in the Roman Senate as he did out on the wild banks of the Rhine. Which brings us to a really provocative thought I want to leave you with. We've taken this journey through his incredibly detailed accounts of the woad-dyed Britons, the stark, crazy differences between Gauls and Germans, the weird mythical beasts of the Hercynian Forest, and, of course, his own self-reported brilliance in solving Rome's debt crisis. But looking back at all of this, we really have to ask ourselves, was Caesar actually a reliable narrator of the ancient world, just objectively recording truth for the rest of us? Or was he a master propagandist, carefully crafting his own image as this indispensable intellectual and statesman to justify his ultimate power? It's a really fascinating lens through which to view history. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.